If you are or have ever been an avid Pokémon Go player, let me ask you a question. How does Pokémon Go compare to other games? Or more accurately, what kind of game is it? It's a question that dawned on me when I moved from a city with a fairly robust Pokémon Go community to a small town in the rural south. Once I arrived, I joined the local Pokémon Go Discord and attended a meetup event for local players. I expected their numbers to be fewer than where I came from, but what surprised me the most when I arrived was to find, well, I was one of the youngest players there. This is a college town with no less than 4 universities, and yet it was less like a competitive Pokémon tournament event and more like those groups of elderly people who gather in malls to walk for exercise. So how do you compare something like that to, say, Dark Souls, Fortnite, or Grand Theft Auto? Can you even compare them at all? Or is Pokémon Go less like a video game and more like something else that you often see seniors filling their time with? Is Pokémon Go gambling? Is this all just gambling dressed up as exercise? You know how when some people graduate high school, some of them take a year to, well, stop, take a breath, maybe travel and find themselves, before going off to college and or pursue a career? Well, I did that, but instead of a year, it was for most of my 20s. I found myself working at a convenience store, and if you've ever worked at one of these places, especially off of a major highway, then you know that there are basically 2 kinds of customers. There's the kind that are on the road and need to stop, stretch their legs, and refresh themselves, and the kind that are there to refresh their vices. Alcohol, cigarettes, gambling, and oftentimes a combination thereof. So one day a guy comes in with his daughter, and he's a little rough around the edges. 29 going on 40, if you know what I mean. He comes up to my counter holding a 6-pack of beer and asks for a pack of Camels and some lotto tickets. What we have here is a Triple Crown winner. All 3 addictions being serviced at once. But as I'm printing his lotto tickets for him, his daughter, maybe 5 to 6 years old, who'd been wandering around the store completely unsupervised, walks up and she is excitedly holding a toy. I finish ringing the man up and tell him his total, at which point he looks down at his daughter, picks up the toy she'd been holding, looks at the price, and tells her to put it back. It was a little sparkly princess figurine that cost $1.99. Sorry, little girl, your happiness is not as important as Daddy's buffet of addictions today. Now let's be honest, life is usually way more complicated than that. Maybe the girl asks for toys everywhere. Maybe her bedroom is decked out in little princess figurines because wherever she goes, she asks for one and Dad always says yes. Maybe he always puts his daughter's love for toys above himself to the point that the family is in financial dire straits, and he's been working triple shift to the plant for weeks because of his daughter's crippling relationship with princess figurines, and today is just the day that Dad puts his foot down and says, "No, I desperately need a drink and a smoke and a couple lotto tickets for myself. Just this once." But you couldn't tell that to me in my 20s. I was internally furious at this complete stranger. And although I had no intention of working at a convenience store for long, this man choosing alcohol, cigarettes, and gambling over the wishes of his daughter, and the thought of me being a daily conduit between people and their addictions, disgusted me beyond measure. And the simple reason for that was, just as it is now, because I am an addict. And being an addict is specifically why I play Pokémon Go. In the main series Pokémon games, the odds of encountering a shiny Pokémon are so astronomically low that many fans of the series may not have ever encountered one or even known of their existence. Currently, the odds in main series games without any events, use of a shiny charm, or the Masuda method are 1 in 4,096. Now, that doesn't mean that if you encounter 4,096 Pokemon that you are guaranteed to find a shiny. It means that every time you encounter a Pokemon, there is a 0.0244% chance that it will be shiny. It could happen on the very first one or the 10,000th one. When shinies were released in Pokemon Go, they were given a base shiny rate of 1 in 512, or a 0.195% chance. To many, this increased shiny rate cheapened and devalued what is supposed to be an unbelievably rare occurrence in the world of Pokemon. But I would argue that this is counteracted by the single biggest difference between Pokémon Go and regular Pokémon games. When you see people shiny hunting Pokémon, they can play the game and encounter Pokémon, and there are zero limitations on how many Pokémon they can encounter. They can just do that over and over again until they get their shiny, and the only limitation that exists is the amount of time and attention they are willing to devote to shiny hunting. In Pokémon Go, once a Pokémon spawns, it is either shiny or it isn't. You can't leave the area and come back to a new spawn. You are limited by the amount of spawns you encounter in the real but also virtual world of Pokémon Go. On top of that, finding Pokémon isn't as simple as hopping on an in-game bike with the press of a button and leaning a joystick to make your character move around, or even fast traveling. Unless you're spoofing, Pokémon Go requires physical exertion. But the greatest difference between shiny hunting and Pokémon Go versus the regular games is that when you look at them side by side, the ones in Pokémon Go are basically gambling. The Masuda method is a popular way to hunt shiny Pokémon that was introduced in Gen 4. It involves breeding two Pokémon from different language versions of the game and hatching eggs. Typically, this involves obtaining a Ditto so you can breed it with anything. Using the Masuda method coupled with a shiny charm reduces the odds of hatching a shiny to 1 in 512. Pokémon Go doesn't have a Masuda method, but it does have many Pokémon which only hatch from eggs and have increased shiny odds. There are also frequent events that boast increased shiny odds when hatching eggs. But while in the main series games you can ride around your bike carrying eggs until they hatch, in Pokémon Go this process is mostly monetized by way of incubators. The game gives you a single, infinite egg incubator with which to hatch eggs, but purchasing additional incubators will greatly increase the frequency of eggs hatched and thus increase the odds of hatching a shiny. Masuda egg hatching methods aside, the best way to hunt shinies in all of Pokemon are the Dynamax adventures from the Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC, the Crown Tundra. Here you can go on a raid adventure where you will battle and catch 4 Pokemon, including 1 legendary, each of which has shiny odds of just 1 in 100 if you have the shiny charm. This is, by a considerable margin, some of the best odds to shiny hunt in the main series games. And you could argue that these raids were, in some part, influenced by the raid system in Pokemon Go. After all, they had raids first. But unlike the Pokemon Sword and Shield version, where, again, there are no limits placed on the player, you can do max battle raids for as long as you want. While in Pokemon Go, you will need money! Because in Pokemon Go, unless there is an event going on, you only receive 1 raid pass per day. So for example, if you are shiny hunting a legendary Pokemon in raids, which is 1 in 20, and that legendary is only in raids for 7 days, and you only use your free daily raid pass for 7 days, the odds of getting that shiny are about 30%, unless you buy some extra raid passes. It's funny what we think gambling is or isn't. It's some old dudes playing cards in a smoke-filled room. It's someone at the track clutching a ticket and screaming for a horse to run impossibly fast. It's some sad sack who put his family's well-being on the outcome of a football game. But if you grew up in a world where gambling was mostly illegal, the world of today seems like an impossible nightmare. Sports betting went from something done either in Las Vegas or a seedy corner bar to having entire segments and shows dedicated to it on ESPN. 50 commercials every time you tune into a game. Kids opening Call of Duty loot crates or whatnot sports card rips, the way geriatrics mash buttons on a slot machine. And yes, in a way, that absolutely includes Pokemon Go. It is completely insane the amount of gambling we now allow in our entertainment. But I'm not saying you shouldn't play it. Remember the guy I told you about? The one who put beer, cigarettes, and lotto tickets before making his daughter smile? I know I was angry, and maybe you were too, but there's a reason why I still remember him to this day. See, there's this saying someone once told me that I still find to be one of the truest things I've ever heard. The flaws you see in others are the ones you see in yourself. Basically, it means that if you ever find yourself becoming irrationally angry at someone, the odds are pretty good that whatever they did to elicit your anger is something that you are guilty of yourself. And the emotional response you're having isn't so much by their actions, but how they reflect those of your own. See, a few years before this happened, I was a teenager, standing in the parking lot of my local mall. In front of me, there was an ongoing shouting match between a friend of mine and a middle-aged guy named Don. Don just threw my friend and I out of the mall, which was hosting a card show that he was in charge of. I stood there quietly while Don and my friend were yelling at each other, and I wished that my friend would just shut up so Don didn't call the cops on me, because Don threw me out for stealing. And Don knew I was guilty because a few years before that, he threw me out of his card shop for stealing. Because as embarrassing as it still is to admit, I was then and still am addicted to opening packs of cards. I would do anything, including shoplifting, stealing from loved ones, potentially ruining relationships and nearly being sent to jail, just to open more packs of cards. And when I say I still am, I mean that I still find myself watching videos on YouTube of people ripping packs of cards. I still feel that same impulse to open them myself. Still find myself side-eyeing the displays in Target, even though I haven't collected in many years. And it is because of that knowledge about myself that I can confidently say that I absolutely play Pokémon Go because of those same addictive, embarrassing impulses. Breathing pure oxygen causes oxygen poisoning. Drinking too much water will shut down your kidneys, cause hypothermia, followed by death. Loving someone too much will end in the police knocking on your door. At a certain point, a high enough amount of anything is extremely harmful. But the knowledge of being addicted to Pokémon Go doesn't mean I shouldn't play a game that brings me an immense amount of joy. Because while I have some impressive Pokémon hauls from the last 7.5 years, the thing I am most proud of is the nearly 18,000 kilometers I have explored. There have been countless days when I didn't feel like running, but an event in Pokémon Go got me to put on my running shoes and get out there. So, yes, Pokémon Go is very adept at tickling the inner impulses we have to gamble. But, in my opinion, there is great power in both acknowledging the game's ability, understanding how it works, how it can adversely affect you, and taking control of your inner demons. So, I hope you all stay safe, play within your limits, and most importantly, have fun out there, trainers.